Thank you. Thank you. I'm like, I can't find the button. We do these the second Monday of every month. And for the most part, these trainings are on topics that are required by HUD funding or our system of care. At the end, you're going to have an opportunity to provide feedback. We know you have to do these, but we want you to enjoy them and actually learn from them. So please give us feedback at the end so we can make them better. Okay, this is horrible, but I'm including this because you're going to get this slide deck afterwards. This is why we're doing this training. This is what HUD is requiring, basically all programs that are funded with CoC, which is like HUD money, or ESG. If you're not sure if your agencies are funded by that, you can talk to Shelby. But basically, these are the requirements of what programs funded by those funding sources that work with families with children or unaccompanied youth, all the things that they need to be doing. And a lot of it relates to education. But this is why we're doing this training, because you can see there's a lot of things that people are required to do. And we want to make sure that you know how to do those things. So the trainers will go through a lot of this, but we like to put up front, like, this is why we're doing this training, just from a rules and regs perspectives. But there's also so that you can become better at your job and better meet the needs of the folks that you're serving. Shelby, I'm going to turn this over to you for a second.
Sure. Thanks, Jamie. Hi, everyone. Good morning. As always, I say the same thing every month, every time we have this training, but your attendance here, if you're a homeless service provider that's contracted or funded or both, with H3 or the CoC, you're required to attend, and attendance is monitored monthly by myself and or Jamie J, or a combination. And I'll be meeting with you all quarterly, or I already do, and we talk about attendance and whether you have staff coming to the meeting. So please make sure staff are coming to these trainings. And if you are not attending trainings regularly, then we'll definitely have a conversation with myself. But hope you all are attending. We do record them. So if there was, off chance, maybe you had a staff that's sick or unable to attend the training, you should be able to view the recording. And Jamie, I don't know if you want to plug a little bit about our website.
Yes. So I will also drop a link at the end, but our website has changed. So where you maybe used to go to look for trainings, it might look vastly different. But we do have all of our training videos and the slide decks from probably the last 4 years are there. And so I'll drop a link at the end of the training, or maybe Shelby, you can do it later if you can find it. So that folks can find those. And we also email everyone that registered after the training, and we will include the slide deck, the link to the recording, as well as a link to the survey. We'll do it then. This year, we are also really trying to put a finer point on thinking about equity. And so we're asking folks before every training, there are equity issues all over the place that show up in all sorts of different ways. So for this training, we're thinking specifically about families with children and unaccompanied minors. So start thinking about the ways that you've seen the way that things may be uneven or unequal in your own work. Excuse me. Are there ways that you may have accidentally contributed to or interrupted some of these imbalances? And then start thinking about what barriers still exist and how they might be addressed. So as you're going through this training, these are just questions to hold into your own mind. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Gina Bills, who's the education liaison, and Alejandra Chamberlain, who's the director of youth services, both with the Contra Costa Office of Ed.
Good morning, everyone.
Okay, you guys are echoing. One of you has to mute. We're going to have Gina unmute, I think is what we decided.
You got me. Sorry about that. Good morning, everyone.
Technology.
Can you hear me good? Yeah, okay, perfect. As Jamie mentioned, I'm Alejandra Chamberlain. I'm the Director of Youth Services with the Contra Costa County Office of Education. Next slide. You all already did introduce yourself. We had a little question. You're welcome to answer that question if you feel like it. If not, no worries. In the spirit of keeping with our Valentine's in February, what is your favorite sweet treat that you enjoy? But if you don't want to put it in the chat, you're not gonna hurt our feelings. Next slide. As I mentioned, I'm Alejandra Chamberlain, and I will let Gina introduce herself.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Gina Bills. I'm the Education Liaison here at the County Office of Education. Nice to see everyone.
So a little bit of CCCOE in regards to how we support all of our 18 districts. As I mentioned, we do have 18 districts. The County Office of Ed is also a district themselves. And so technically speaking, there's 19 districts in our county and 286 schools with a total enrollment of 1,690, 225 students countywide. And then when you think about our charters, there's 12,913. So that's a lot of students. Actually, a fun fact is that we're the top 10, maybe 11 in regards to the 58 counties in the state. Yes, I know, Jamie, we are up there for a small little county in regards to size, right? When you think about LA or San Diego or those large districts, we have quite a bit of enrollment in our county as a whole. Next slide. When you think about the County Office of Ed, we're kind of like a county entity in regards to cities. So very similar how your Board of Supervisors, they provide support to the cities, but the cities run themselves. They have their own mayor, they have their own city manager, similar very much to the county office. The county office as a whole supports the 18 districts, but ultimately they have their own superintendent as well as their board, and they run their own districts. We're like a big sister or a favorite aunt to the districts as opposed to mom and pop. Then when you're thinking about the big picture of what the county office does, there's different buckets. And so one of them is student programs, and student programs, that's where youth services falls into. And youth services provides a variety of services, focus on youth, children as well, but most of it is youth. And then we do provide that technical assistance and professional development to the 18 districts, and particularly from the hat of supporting our McKinney-Vento district liaisons, or that go-to entity from the state to us, and then we provide that support to the district. We also support our community colleges, work closely with probation, as well as community-based organizations, child welfare, H3, and so forth. Next slide. Some of the programs that we have within youth services is the Education for Homeless Children and Youth, which is what we're highlighting today, our Foster Youth Services Coordinating Program, workforce programs, all with the intent of serving opportunity youth. And when I say the word opportunity youth, I refer to youth who are in foster care, youth who are experiencing housing instability or homelessness, as well as involved in the juvenile justice system, our empowerment program, and wellness at schools. Next slide. And so a little bit about our time today, as Jamie mentioned, there are some things that you need to keep in mind as you're working with your clients, and particularly as you try to navigate families who have children and youth, and making sure that the children and youth are attending school, enrolled in school, and have the resources they need to be able to do that. Next slide. So before we get started, we thought that we would ask you, how many children and youth were identified as experiencing homelessness during the 2022-23 school year? Go ahead and put it in the chat. Take your guess, take your best guess, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
And Alejandra, this is like identified through the districts, like through your office?
Correct.
Mm-hmm. These
There's-
answers in the chat.
Yes. 125, 250, 200, 2,500, 600, 1,000, 500, 300, 3,000, 450 to 600. Okay. Good guesses. I like it. Okay, well, let's find out. Next slide. In Contra Costa schools, there was 2,763 identified children and youth. Next slide. So this gives you a little bit of an overview in the previous years. As you can see, it does fluctuate between 2,000, 3,000 at one point. If we go further beyond the 2018-19 school year, there was a little dip in 21-22. Most of us are aware there was a decrease in enrollment as a whole. And then of course that we saw it in our different populations, like children who are experiencing homelessness. But it is a large number in regards to what people think of when they think about children and youth experiencing homelessness. And we'll get to the reason why. Next slide. And then we do want to highlight how many children and youth are in the foster care system. And of course, there's, a difference between those numbers, but ultimately just so that we could keep in mind when we're thinking about our whole county.
So who are our homeless youth? Under the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, they are identified as homeless children and youth. Next slide, please. So the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. The McKinney-Vento Act is a federal law that ensures the educational rights and protections of children and youth that are experiencing homelessness. Funding is authorized for the education for homeless children and youth, also known as the EHCY program. And that money is allocated, it comes down from CDE, California Department of Education, and then it's provided to our counties and distributed to our charter schools and school districts based on need. And the McKinney-Vento law also dictates that homeless children and youth have equal and immediate access to education as same thing as their housed peers. And then the act also applies to our local school districts and charter schools. So anything considered a local education agency or an LEA is subject to the McKinney-Vento Act. Next slide, please. So another question for our group this morning. What do you think? And you're going to hear Alejandra and I ask that question quite a few times during our time together this morning. So which of the following do you think are included in the McKinney-Vento Act definition of homeless? Sharing the housing of other persons due to relocation, bankruptcy, loss of housing, job loss, or economic hardship. So what do you think? Let us know. Drop your thoughts in the chat. It could be one, it could be two or three of those. It could be none of them. Let us know. Oh, I'm seeing lots of all of the above. Is that my only consensus so far? Oh. All right, we'll give folks another minute or so. Looks like survey says all of the above. Okay, Jamie J, do you want to go ahead and reveal our answers there? So it is, loss of housing and economic hardship. So that is the letter of the law under the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act.
Can I say a little bit more?
Yes, please.
I agree with all of you in regards to all, because when you naturally just look at that question, you can say, well, if they relocated and it was because of someone lost their job, or they relocated because they're leaving a domestic violence situation or bankruptcy, how do we know that somebody lost it? So there is layers upon layers around any of the ones that are listed there. And that's something to kind of keep in mind. And so when I was having this conversation with Gina, we were going back and forth. She's like, of course you're going to think about all the layers that can be folded into any of those situations. She's like, but what does the actual act say? And I said, I don't know, Gina, let me hear you. And she's like, it is loss of housing and economic hardship. So we do want to acknowledge that although the act does really speak to those two, there is so much more when it comes to a particular situation and a person facing those situations. And that's something that we'll kind of dig deep into that as we go through the presentation around how to have those conversations and how to really get to the root so that you can better support your families.
And of course, it is case by case basis. Next slide, please. So under the McKinney-Vento Act, speaking of the letter of the law, it does go on to say that homelessness is identified for individuals and families who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. So that's often referred to as like the guiding phrase of the McKinney-Vento definition. So you may hear, is the student lacking a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence? However, when it comes to the McKinney-Vento Act, it goes on to include some other situations and other living arrangements that would be considered homeless because they are not fixed, regular, and adequate. And that includes our folks that are staying in hotels and motels, or they're temporarily staying with another family, or as Alejandra and I just mentioned, the result of economic hardship, their living situation, they may be doubled up. They could be living in a vehicle, or they could be staying at a shelter or housing agencies. So it's important to remember that under the McKinney-Vento Act, from a school site lens, about 3/4 of our McKinney-Vento students that are identified as homeless are living in a doubled up situation. And it's also important to note when it comes to the McKinney-Vento Act, of course, it's different from the HUD definition, which is literally unsheltered. Substandard housing is also included in the McKinney-Vento Act. And so when we think of substandard housing, some fundamental questions that might come to mind are, is the house lacking basic fundamental utilities? Does it have a flushing toilet? Does it have running water? Does it pose any dangers? Maybe there's exposed wiring or missing stairs. And under the McKinney-Vento Act, migrant children are also considered to be homeless. Of course, we want to stay close to the letter of the law. And so always ask, what is their current living situation? From our side, we're not so much interested in how they got into that situation. And what we're really looking is where the children and family are living now, and if it's fixed, regular, and adequate. Next slide, please. So this graphic just illustrates some of our most heavily impacted districts when it comes to our McKinney-Vento youth. Out of our 18 school districts, you'll see for the 22-23 school year, Antioch identified 308 students. Another heavy hitter, Mount Diablo, had 612 students. Pittsburgh, barely ahead with 614 students. And then our largest district, West Contra, with 729 students identified. Next slide, please. So we wanted to share this GIS data map. If you guys want to follow along, you're welcome to scan that QR code. This was released by CDE last year. And what it does is it provides a snapshot of census day data capturing homelessness. So there's two pieces on the map. One tab is homeless enrollment by district. Next slide. Which you'll see on this figure. And at the very bottom, you'll see the next tabs that allow you to scroll through between the two. Next slide, please. And then the next tab is homeless enrollment change by district. So you're able to actually search and scroll in by any district here in California. And then on the second tab, homeless enrollment change by district, you'll see Contra Costa in there, and we had a change of 14%. Next slide. We just highlighted that. So when it comes to our education rights, I wanted to just pause for a moment and take a quick temperature check and ask the group, who has seen these posters? And if so, are they posted in your agency? Where else have you seen them? You guys can just let us know in the chat. And what are some ways that we could include this information for families and students, not only to see, but maybe during your intake process or during a meeting with your family?
Gina, I wanted to ask a quick question relating to
Sure.
the data that you just showed.
Mhm.
Is there also like a race and ethnicity breakdown of homelessness by district or in a county as we're thinking about equity?
Not on that particular area, but I can send you the demographic link to get that data.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure. So let's see what's going on in the chat. Never have seen these posters posted right outside my office. Awesome, Tiffany. Thank you. We appreciate that. Anyone else?
I'm going to assume that because we're not
Quiet?
getting
That
as
they're posted
many-
everywhere. That everyone has seen them, everyone knows what they say, and people have them on hand to pass out, right? Is that what you were thinking?
And if not, then it's a good reminder for us to come to your site and give you a poster, 2 or 10, how many you need and want.
Please let us know. I make deliveries, and FYI, fun fact, I keep some in my trunk and ran into someone the other day and gave them some posters right on my car. So let's talk a little bit about the posters. Oh, someone says they are posted. Thank you, Lupe. And if you haven't seen these posters, it's okay. We're going to talk about it. And then by the end of this, you'll let us know where we can drop some off to you. So these are posters that you can enroll in school posters. You'll see in English and Spanish. They are provided to us by CDE, and just go over the rights for parents and students when it comes to education. So on that poster lets us know that students experiencing homelessness have the right to enroll in school immediately, even without documents normally needed for enrollment. So that can include your immunizations, birth certificate, any other required health records, obviously proof of residency, legal guardianship papers. The poster also mentions the right to be able to fully participate in school activities or programs to which they're eligible. So even though the family and student might be impacted by homelessness, they do still have the right to participate in any activities the same as they would as their housed peers. The poster also mentions transportation, the right to receive transportation to and from school of origin if it's requested. And we're going to get a little more into that in just a second. And then the right to continue to attend the school where the student was last enrolled, even if a student is experiencing homelessness and they've moved away or switched schools several times away from the original school's attendance area. Next slide, please.
There's a quick question. Do you have a
Yeah.
link to flyers or posters that people could download today and print out? Or are
We
they
do.
only? Okay,
Yes.
awesome. Thanks.
When we switch, I will look for it.
So just some other questions that came to mind. What ways could we include this during your guys' intake process when you're working with a family? And what other information would you want to know pertaining to educational rights? So we can approach that question from both sides of the coin, both as staff, what would you like to know? And then if you were a parent coming in and getting ready to enroll your child, what other information would you be curious and want to know about when it comes to educational rights? School secretaries aren't well informed of such. At our clinic, we have a number of patients being turned away from schools. Thanks, Stephanie. That's really great information and helpful to know. In a second, Alejandra is going to talk more about getting connected to our local liaisons at every school district. But these posters would be great. So we'll make sure that you have some of those. And feel free to mention that to your families that are coming through, that they do have the right. They should not be turned away at any school site. A child should not be denied enrollment or education should not be a barrier to getting in school and getting the students behind a desk. Questions, comments, thoughts about education rights or the posters? Again, not to be a broken record, but if you do need posters, please let us know in the chat and we'll make sure to get those out to you. On the poster, there are 3 designated spots. There is a spot for information for your local school liaison. There is information for your county liaison, which is myself. And then the 3rd spot is the state contact information, which is Leanne Wheeler at CDE. Now I will pass it off to Alejandra so she can talk more about our school liaisons.
Okay, next slide. So Gina covered all of this. Basically, it was around what are their rights? And so those 2 slides break it down for everyone. And then we're going to dive deeper into it. So next slide. As Gina had mentioned, all the different rights are listed. And when you're thinking about the process of really making sure the children and youth experience those rights, it's important to know who your liaisons are. So next slide. So we have a list of all of the liaisons, and I'm working on that poster, so please forgive me. It's much harder when you actually have to get ready to speak and then try to look for something, and then you're like, I know I have it. So we will get you that, and in that same process, let me make sure I get you the link to the liaisons. So that I do have handy dandy.
It's on that slide.
Yes, but they won't unless they already got the actual slides, which they'll get them at the end. You'll see that there's a hyperlink and they'll be able to click on it. But in the meantime, you also can, I put it in the chat.
Okay.
So that is a list of all of your McKinney-Vento. They happen to wear both hats. Most of them, they're the foster care as well as a McKinney-Vento district liaison. You'll see who it is, what district, their phone number and email. And there's one dedicated for each district. So there's 18 plus ourselves, 19. And so when in doubt, you can always call Gina or myself when you have a question. But if you know the district that the kiddo is either leaving from or their school of origin, which we'll get into the technical part of that, or they're going to a new district, you can definitely reach out to the liaison. Their main role is to make sure that they support in the process of enrollment and so forth. Next slide. So immediate enrollment. As we think about immediate enrollment, I know that many of you already have a sense of what that looks like. You know, we think about immediate enrollment, it is what it is, right? You start getting the kiddo enrolled and you make sure that they're attending and so forth. So in this particular mindset of thinking about our McKinney-Vento students and immediate enrollment, we know that sometimes they don't, and maybe more than sometimes, don't have all the required documents to be enrolled. And so this calls out the academic records, the immunization, the health records, proof of residency, and so forth. So when it comes to our McKinney-Vento students, and when we say immediate enrollment, it means that they don't have to have all of those documents to be enrolled in school. And when we say enroll in school, it means attending class. It doesn't mean that we have the paperwork and the paperwork has been filed and we'll talk to you soon when they could actually attend class and be warming up a seat. It means they're actually attending school the next day. If not soon after. We know that it doesn't always happen as quickly as we would want it to be. Schools are, dealing with a lot like most of us, but it doesn't mean it should take more than a week for the kiddo to start attending class. Next slide.
Alejandro, there's a question in the chat. Does this also apply to preschool assessment centers for special ed services?
That one gets a little bit more tricky in regards to the preschool around the assessment component. Anytime there's special ed involvement, you will find that the districts have to do their due diligence to make sure that the placement is appropriate. However, that doesn't mean that it should take a month, right? Or it doesn't mean it should take 2 weeks. I am often nudging our districts to really think about what is the best possible solution to keep those two situations in mind, meaning you need to enroll right away, but you also want to be mindful of what the IEP calls out, what you need to provide as a district in regards to those IEP services, and whether you know what that is, right? So like if a kiddo shows up to the district, they have an IEP, the parent knows that they have an IEP, but they don't have it with them. So the district is now facing a situation of like, do we place them in a regular school, knowing that that might not be the best appropriate placement? Or do we wait to get the IEP, but the IEP is gonna take a little longer, so therefore the kiddo is gonna be left out of class. Ideally, it's a combination of both, right? But we want to be mindful that depending on the needs, it's going to take a little longer. So with that, I say it's would be ideal for us as the providers to help the parents gather all that information, especially an IEP. And that's where Gina and I could be of support. But that doesn't mean you wait. You start talking to the district liaison, you fill out the paperwork, you have the parents show up, you get that process going so that hopefully the gap is smaller. So when it comes to the preschool, the same situation applies. They do have the right to be enrolled. The preschool should be saving some spots, doing their due diligence, but the component of the special ed will add a little bit more of a process, just so that we are mindful of that placement. And when I say we, I mean like all of my 18 districts as well as our own district. Next slide. So we have our first scenario. After conducting an intake assessment, a parent discloses that they have 3 kids, ages 6, 12, and 15, and they have not been attending school. What assistance can you offer and what questions do you have for the family? So I know that this is a little bit more involvement, so I welcome you all, if Jamie is okay, to unmute and share your thoughts, because I know that trying to put all that in the chat might discourage us from participating.
And I encourage
speak
folks
for
to
myself.
use their little raise hand features just so we don't have chaos.
Yeah,
if you have
absolutely.
The ability. And then we can help coordinate. Does anybody have thoughts?
So I'll read the scenario again. I know that it's there for you to read, but just so that we could fill up the space while you're processing. So you have a family or a parent who's showed up at one of your sites, and you've done your assessment process, right? You find out through that assessment process, they have 3 kids, those are the ages, and you also find out that they're not attending school. Where would you take it from there?
So
What questions come to mind?
So we
There's
have,
something in the chat for you.
what is the barrier to education for the family? That's a good question.
What might you ask the family? What else would you want to know about their situation?
Vicky?
Okay. I would ask the family like where they are currently staying, like which city, and then if they will, and then do they wish to enroll their kids in the district? Because it if it's for shelter, it's like every night it's different. So which like the preferred district that they would like enroll the kids, and do they have transportation to get the children to school?
Those are all really great questions.
We have some other ones in the chat. How long have they been out of school? Are you safe? What is the reason for not attending school? Great questions.
Have they ever been to school, right? And where? So that really does speak to some of the following slides that we're going to have. But ultimately, you are all thinking like we would want you to think about this particular scenario. So what schools will the children attend, have been attending? What city were they previously residing at? What city are they residing at? Does it make sense to keep the kiddos where they were previously attending? How long has it been since they last attended? Why are they not attending? All of those questions will help you put the scenario together and have background information. So when you reach out to the liaison in support of getting the kiddos enrolled, those are the questions that they're going to ask. In addition, something to keep in mind is, do they have any of the records that can help the process of enrollment, right? So although they don't need the records to immediately enroll, it is a good idea to think about, do they have their immunization records? Do they have any of the previous records from the last academic year or the last time they were enrolled? As well as like that IEP that we were just talking about. Do they have a copy from the last IEP that they had? Or if they have a 504, right? Someone just put that in the chat as well. And then if transportation is a barrier, what can also be done? And we'll talk about that transportation component in the other slides coming up. So yes, I think I was looking at my list to make sure that we touched on everything. And yes, I think most of you guys are already thinking about what would help you really guide the family.
All right, school of origin and residency. So homeless students, including our unaccompanied youth, which we'll talk about, have a right to either attend the local school or their school of origin. And that's really in accordance of what is in the student's best interest. So when it comes to the McKinney-Vento Act, the McKinney-Vento Act defines the local attendance area school as any public school that their housed peers who live in the attendance area or district boundaries in which the child or youth was living are eligible to attend. Where the McKinney-Vento Act defines the school of origin, that's the school that a child was attending when they were permanently housed or where they were last enrolled. And it's important for this part for school of origin that also includes our public preschools. So our little guys are included in the McKinney-Vento Act as well as our receiving schools. Next slide, please. So of course, we have another scenario for you. So this time you all are working with a family at Shelter Inc.'s Mountain View Family Shelter. And this family has a high school student who is, it says previously attending Antioch High School because that's where they were going when they were housed. However, now that they're at the shelter, they are continuing to attend Antioch High School and prior to being placed in emergency housing. So my question to all of you, what is the student's school of origin and what would be their school of residence? So either raise your hand or drop your thoughts in the chat. Let us know for this student. Antioch for both. Sherry, if you're feeling extra brave, do you want to share why you answered both? I see.
Okay,
Antioch.
so I answered for both because that's you had mentioned how they can still attend the school prior to becoming homeless. The school of their origin can be where they were last attending or their last residence.
Thank you.
But my only concern is like now that they're at Mountain View, the transportation can now be an issue. However, don't they have with the McKinney-Vento Act, don't you guys have transportation funding for that as well?
We're going to get into that.
Yeah.
Thank you. So for this student, their school of origin is Antioch High School. And, oh, thank you, Raina. And their school of residence, because now they are staying at the shelter, would be Martinez. because that is the school closest within their attendance boundary. Next slide, please. So, transportation. Ensuring that homeless children and youth can exercise the right to continue attending their school of origin. Under the McKinney-Vento Act, that really requires school districts to provide transportation to and from their school of origin. And that's also the case when it comes to our unaccompanied youth, if the local liaison requests transportation for that unaccompanied youth. And school of origin transportation rights extend, like I mentioned earlier, to our public preschools and our receiving schools. So that's the definition of school of origin, including transportation to and from school of origin, but not school of residence. And under the McKinney-Vento Act, McKinney-Vento students are entitled to that transportation. And school districts must continue to provide transportation to and from their school of origin for the remainder of the school year, during which a homeless student becomes permanently housed. So, for example, if a student became homeless and was identified in October, and they were continuing to attend their school of origin, in our scenario, that was Antioch High School, but they became permanently housed in, say, April, the district would continue to provide transportation to this student who was formerly homeless until the end of the academic school year. So if the student remained permanently housed following that, then they would not be deemed McKinney-Vento eligible for the following school year. But for this purpose, and when it comes to transportation, it does extend for the remaining time of the academic school year.
Can I add something?
Yes, please.
So when it comes to transportation, something we want you to be aware of is that the LEAs do have budget for transportation. It is a very small budget. I will be very transparent with that. They do absolutely the best possible to support the families in whatever way they can. And sometimes that might look like BART tickets or Clipper cards, I should say, because I think all of them are no longer tickets or Clipper cards. So Clipper cards for whatever it is, whether it's a bus or BART, as well as, we've had the pleasure of sometimes supporting through Hop Skip Drive, which is a kid-friendly Uber. And then, there's as well, just thinking about, is there someone within the district that is willing to pass by and pick up the kiddos on their way to work? I like to give that example because it's a little wishfulness. It doesn't really happen, but ultimately the intent for transportation is that there's that flexibility of like, how can the district partner with the school residency district and share the cost? What other options are available? Is there already a bus that's going through that neighborhood that can stop by and pick up the kiddo? So although we are required to provide transportation, it is sometimes not the most easiest task for a liaison to accomplish because we are working with a small budget. Ultimately, the transportation is provided with the intent of ensuring that the kiddos are attending school. So what happens is when the kiddos are not attending school and transportation is being provided, then you have where the liaisons are then wondering, is this the best match? AKA, we like to say, is the best school of origin or the best interest of the student to continue to attend that particular school. Often we do want to, like Gina already covered the school of origin, we do want to encourage the kiddos to stay in their school of origin. That's why the McKinney-Vento Act was originally put in place, so that when children are at a school in a particular district, because that's where they lived, and then their family is experiencing a domestic violence situation and they're leaving, or a parent just lost their job and they're now having to go and stay with another family, they're leaving that district, but ultimately still have the right to stay in their school of origin. Meanwhile, the parents are figuring out where they're going to land. So when we think about that process, and if the kiddo is like the original situation that, or scenario that Gina gave, the kiddo is attending Antioch Unified School District, they move to the shelter in Martinez, and, you know, they might be a senior, it's their last year, and you pay for transportation, the district pays for transportation to make sure they get to school and graduate, right? Kiddo might be attending every day, not a big deal, and the district might spend quite a bit of money, but doesn't mind because obviously it's with the intent of getting them through their last year. You have a kindergartner who maybe shouldn't be spending that much time in route, but to each his own, right? Like if the parent decides that that's the situation and they want them to stay in their school of origin, they do. But the kiddo is, you know, often late or doesn't make it to school, then the liaisons both from Martinez and Antioch might come together and say, you know, this isn't really working out. This isn't the best interest for the child. Let's come back to the decision around keeping the kid in the school of origin. Maybe it's best that they enroll in Martinez, right? So that's where ultimately everything is done, the school of origin, the transportation, all with the intent of getting kiddos in the class, attending and engaged. And so when that's not happening, then we're going to bring the group together, whether that's the caregiver and the child, if appropriate, based on age. Sometimes, you know, I've seen inviting the shelter staff to really look at, you know, does it make sense? So it's more complicated than simply just paying for transportation and then calling it quits, is what I really want you all to take away from this example. Thank you, Gina.
Next slide, please. So case scenario number 3. So now you're conducting an assessment with a family who is currently living in their car. And you find out they have a 5-year-old who will be entering kindergarten in the fall. But because the family lives in their car, they move around. They stay in different cities during the week, never quite know where they're gonna be. So what assistance can you offer this family, and what questions do you have for them? Let us know your thoughts.
Feel free to raise your hand if you want to speak. Someone brave. I know there's a brave
We have-
extrovert.
We have a big group. Someone's
Yeah.
going to speak up. So what thoughts come to mind for this family? I'm sure you would have a lot of questions for them. In addition to their 5-year-old going to kindergarten, but what other assistance or resources come to mind to help out this family? What do you guys think? Hi, Wanda, go ahead.
Hi, I would imagine the first service to be providing emergency shelter for the family to get
Great.
them into temporary housing, then get them connected with financial support, be it food stamps, SSI, kind of take a look at their financial assessment, and then assistant with getting the kids into permanent school, whether it's close to the shelter or just getting help to get their younger ones back into school, and then working with the adults to provide some form of assistance with employment.
Great, thank you.
Can you dig a little deeper around what that process for getting them enrolled in school, like as you think about everything we've shared?
Who would you reach out to?
In terms of reaching out for assistance to getting them back in school, let's say I think we used the scenario of Antioch. I would talk to someone at the district to see what school had space available for the 5-year-old and try to get them into a school close to the shelter we're going to provide service at. And that might be reaching out, also to the county to get help with their birth certificates and immunization records, because these are all things that they're going to need. And if they've been living in their car, that might also be barriers they're faced with.
Great,
Digging a
thank you.
little
Alejandra just dropped a big hint in the chat over there.
Which is what you were basically, what you mentioned, right? Which is, you're not alone in this process. Each district has a liaison, and, reach out to them and say, hey, I have a kiddo who's in kindergarten and I'm not sure what to do, right? Like, we don't expect any of you who are on this presentation, the 78 of us here, except for Gina and I, to know exactly what that process is going to look like, right? From, where on the website do you actually fill out the enrollment paper or this or that? Like, that's a lot of information. Like you mentioned, you're thinking about housing, you're thinking about, making sure they have something to eat, connecting them to social services, whatever that looks like, right? And so the educational component, we want you not to worry about all the layers upon layers, and reach out to your liaisons. Each district has one, and they are more than happy to help with that enrollment process.
Can I just add on really
Yes,
quick?
absolutely.
Just to piggyback on what Alejandra is saying, oftentimes liaisons wear multiple hats. They're very busy. So friendly reminder, Alejandra and I are also here. If you're having trouble getting connected to a liaison, please reach out to us. Some other questions and thoughts that come to mind when you're working with this family, you could find out if the kindergartner is up to date on immunizations. Do they have any needed documents or replacement documents that they're in need of? Is their vehicle reliable enough to get the child to and from school? What other resources are they in need of? Is that clothing? Are there smaller children, older children? I think of other agencies like First Five, getting them connected to before and after school care. So really just digging deep. And then also for the liaison, just a friendly reminder that the liaison may or may not know that this is happening. So that's why it's really important to connect with the liaison and exchange information so that everyone's on the same page.
Gina, I see we have a comment in the chat
Mhm.
in regards to the car and whether it's movable and can they get the kid to school, right?
Oh.
So that definitely is something to think about and to dig a little deeper around, is transportation going to be something that they need? And, letting the liaison know ahead will help the process in regards to getting them enrolled quicker.
Right.
So those are all great things to keep in mind.
And we also know that during the assessment and the intake process, it's not always a comfortable conversation on both ends. Families often are reluctant to disclose the information. It's embarrassing. They don't want to really share their situation with a stranger. And oftentimes when they go to the school, they have to tell their story quite a few times. So making that direct link to either intake staff and or the liaison might make a family more inclined to share their situation and be more receptive to getting services and resources.
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway, Gina, as we think about our families and wanting to disclose that information, is their top one right is that school of origin component or immediate enrollment, right? So
And not being turned away.
Right, not being turned away, as well as not having a fear that they're going to get kicked out as they're moving from one city to a different city, right? Or as they're in one shelter and going to another shelter, depending on what happens. This law is that. It's really ensuring that kiddos have a right to stay in school, and no matter what's happening in their lives with regards to their parents' stability.
Right. And as we saw earlier, someone mentioned that they're working with families and families are being turned away, and that should not be happening. So just going back and honing in on immediate enrollment. And Alejandra and I have seen this where a family gets frustrated and it reaches the county level or the state level, and they're saying, hey, I'm turned away and I don't understand why. And they had no idea of their right to immediate enrollment.
Great question in the chat.
Thanks, everyone.
It's particularly asking, would it be beneficial to try to get the family into a shelter? Wouldn't saying sleeping in a car would cause for CFS to step in and maybe remove the child? Do you want to
No.
answer that one?
Oh, okay.
Or do
Either
you
one.
want me to take it?
I'll start.
Okay,
Just really quickly, a family living in their vehicle does not necessarily constitute a CFS report. Families, again, might be reluctant to say where they're living because they don't want, obviously, their kids to get taken away. So ideally, to answer your question, yes, it would be most beneficial to get the family in a shelter if they were receptive to that. But I think the fear is always there of having a report filed. But just an FYI, it does not constitute a report from CFS. Did you want to add?
I was just gonna mention the same thing in regards from a education liaison, a teacher, a principal. We've done our due diligence to train staff that living in or sleeping in a car doesn't automatically link to a child welfare or a mandated reporting. It is only if there is some pattern of neglect or abuse within that situation, then teachers, principals, counselors, whoever would file a CPS or connect to child welfare. So, of course, that all depends on, yes, as a mandated reporting, but the law in Ed Code particularly calls out that homelessness in and of itself does not mean automatically a mandated report on behalf of the education system. So we want to make sure that we also understand that kiddos, you know, whether you have a high school kiddo or a little one, is not going to share that just openly with everyone, but staff are aware of that. You don't make a mandated reporting just because they're facing homelessness. That's awesome. I'm glad that that was helpful.
Next slide, please.
So graduation rights. We debated whether to put this in here because ultimately we're thinking about your lens, right? Like you have children and youth coming to you, particularly around graduation rights is for your older children or the youth. And how can it be something we want to keep on your radar as you're helping the families? And so we're just going to do a quick overview with the intent of really thinking you might get a youth who's part of that family cohort and you find out some information and ultimately they could have this right implemented. So let me dig deep. So every student who is in foster care, experiencing homelessness, involved in the juvenile justice system, and so on, have the option to opt into a graduation exemption right, which allows them to graduate under the 130 credit requirement of the state. So that means any other credit obligation beyond the 130 is usually driven by local control, meaning the district. The district has decided that for their students to graduate, they're going to need to complete 220 or 230 or whatever that is, but the state requirement is 130. And how this all plays into the process is that a youth would have transferred after their second year of high school and are significantly credit deficient or behind, as well as you notified them and they want to opt into this graduation exemption, and then their caregiver as well. When it comes to our unaccompanied youth, they are their own education rights holder. So that ERH is their education rights holder. That's what that stands for. Next slide. In addition to that basic of how they become eligible, there is an option to not only exercise your graduation exemption for the 130, but also to stay a fifth year to complete either the 130 or the district credit requirement, which will be like 220 or whatever that is, district to district. Ultimately, this is an option, but they need to know that in taking this option, it does impact their post-secondary opportunities. So most likely they will still be able to, not most likely, they will be able to enroll in a community college, but it will impact their ability to go on to a 4-year university. We are actually going to dig deep into the unaccompanied youth, but before we do that, next slide. So the next scenario we have for you is you are working with a 12th grader student and their family who is on track to graduate. However, the family has since moved out of the district. What education-based assistance can be offered?
Do we have any brave souls? How can we help out this senior?
I know it's probably a little bit outside of your typical services and knowledge that you often run into. So I'll jump in a little, and then if any questions come up, feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself.
Someone said help the child enroll in homeschooling.
That's a possibility.
Maybe resources to get him enrolled in online, see what his current school to assist him with graduating on time.
So in that process of like, you know, what are the options? You know, where have a conversation with the 12th grader at that age. Most 12th graders are able to really advocate for themselves, have a sense of like, was that school a good school that they were at in regards to a good match for them? Did they, according to our scenario, they are on track to graduate. So, you know, do they want to stay at that school? Do they want to move to the district of residency? In this particular case, they do have the right to the school of origin, so they can stay at the same district, at the same high school. They also have transportation rights. So with that in mind, reaching out to the liaison and say, hey, we have a kiddo who just showed up at our shelter and they're a 12th grader, and I'm going to pick on a different district, and they're attending the Mount Diablo Unified School District or San Ramon or Acalanes, right? And they want to continue attending that district. They're, you know, almost done, and having a conversation with the liaison to figure out transportation to and from. You can do the homeschool if that is an option that they want to explore, but the main takeaway is they don't have to leave their school of origin just because they moved out of the district. If again, of course, it's tied back to homelessness and you let the district know. So this is where identifying a family and making sure the district is aware is important, because the district may not realize that this kiddo just left their district. And they may not realize that they were facing homelessness, right? So letting the liaison know, asking for transportation assistance, having a conversation with the caregivers, parents, and rights holder, depending on who's involved in the kiddo's life, having a conversation with the student, asking them if they want to stay at the school of origin, or if they would want to do homeschooling, or they want to attend the school of residency, or other options like online school, right? There's so much that can be put into practice, but it really does start with the conversation. Anything in the chat that I missed? Yeah.
I think we're good.
Yes.
So unaccompanied youth, let's just talk a minute about unaccompanied youth and what that looks like and how it's defined under the McKinney-Vento Act. So according to the Act, an unaccompanied youth is a homeless child or youth without a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence and is not in the physical custody of their parent or guardian. So with unaccompanied youth, it's really important to note that the definition refers to physical custody as opposed to legal custody. So when it comes to our unaccompanied youth, oftentimes when our youth have been kicked out, they've been forced out of their home, they've run away, parents often maintain legal custody, but not physical custody. So when it comes to unaccompanied youth, it's just important to always hone in back to not in the physical custody of their parent or guardian. So guardianship and custody issues alone without the presence of a homeless living arrangement is insufficient to deem that student McKinney-Vento eligible. So rather, an unaccompanied youth would be a younger person who is both homeless and unaccompanied. And you'll see by our graphic there, 1 in 6 young people have had at least one incident of homelessness, about 20%. It's pretty alarming. Next slide. And this graphic just further illustrates that point. So in the school districts, you have your pocket of homeless students, and then you'll have a smaller pocket of students who are unaccompanied. And then in an even smaller pocket, you'll have students who fall under both and are deemed homeless unaccompanied youth. Next slide, please. So how do our youth become unaccompanied? Well, sometimes it's due to a lack of space in their living situation or shelter policies. We come across youth that are unaccompanied because there's 7 people in a 1-bedroom apartment. And sometimes family will say, well, you're old enough, or is there someone that you can stay with or couch surf with? And if not, sometimes those youth end up on the street. Shelters often have stay policies, most typically 30, 60, 90 days. I don't need to tell any of you guys that there's a lack of youth shelters here in our county. I see some head nodding. Family dysfunction, hotline calls, 2/3 report that at least one parent is abusing alcohol or drugs, prompting a youth to leave the home. Roughly 1/3 of homeless youth identify as being part of the LGBTQIA+ community. If that's not accepted at home, youth are sometimes kicked out, asked to leave. And then approximately 10% of homeless teens are pregnant. Next slide, please. So case scenario number 5. Now we have Celia. So Celia's 15 and mom has some substance abuse issues that she's struggling with. And as a result, mom's got some questionable people coming in and out of the home, and they're participating in some activities that are making Celia feel pretty uncomfortable and a little anxious. So Celia decides that she's safer getting out of the house. I'm going to go live on my own. So she runs away and is now sleeping on the streets in downtown Richmond. And she's not currently in school, but really wants to get back in school as soon as possible. What information or education-based assistance can be offered to Celia? What do you guys think? How can we help Celia out and get this 15-year-old back in school? Who would we want to connect with? What services could we maybe connect her to? Anyone feeling brave and want to unmute themselves? Thanks, Ricky. So I see Tay, I see CPS. What about at a school district level? Who would we want to connect with? Ricky says some school resources, current school district. Sherry, I'm going to tack on to that and say maybe the school district liaison. I see counselors, support counselors at school. Yeah, so I think with Celia, we want to get her behind a desk, right? So getting connected to the liaison, finding out where she was, maybe asking Celia where she was in school when she was enrolled. Connecting with the liaison to get her previous records, getting her in school. Lupe says connecting her to a youth shelter and determine where she would want to enroll, connecting to the appropriate district liaison. Did you want to say yay? I know. We have the clapping reaction. So yeah, I think there are a few things that we can do for Celia and get her in school, and then finding out what other resources are available. How is she going to get to school? So where else is she staying? Is there friends or family that she's doubled up with? Is she in need of anything that prevents her from getting to school? Transportation, clothing, what school supplies, things like that. Making sure that she has all of the necessities to get back in school and get connected. And I know the youth shelter topic is a little touchy, so we're hoping that changes in the next few years. I'm gonna leave that one alone. I see you nodding over there. Questions about this scenario and Celia and how we can help her. All right, next slide.
I just wanted to add one thing relating to the
Yeah.
shelter piece. So in Contra Costa, there's only one program that supports shelter for unaccompanied minors. So people may have heard about Cali House, and that's really for transition age youth, so 18 and over. So this is one of those times when calling 211 can be really helpful because they have information about shelters for unaccompanied minors. That there's one here, but then there are Oakland is often where folks get referred. And I guess that's my question, right? So say somebody ends up in Dreamcatchers, but they're still going to school in Contra Costa, even if they're across county, like can the district still provide transportation and support if they're in a shelter, say in Oakland, but they're from Antioch?
Yes, absolutely, Jamie. I think that's part of what we want you all to take away is in that particular situation, when the kiddo is in the shelter in Oakland, they could absolutely choose to go to Oakland High School or whatever school is, closest to that residence location. However, if they were just attending Antioch or Mount D or wherever, they have the right to stay at that district. And so reaching out to both of the district liaisons, so they could then correlate and correspond and co-fund transportation so that the kiddo could attend and hopefully graduate and be successful. So even though this, Gina and I represent our county and how we're doing work in our 18 districts, there are very similar positions in Alameda, in pretty much every single county throughout the state. Of course, we want to be mindful that we would never want a kiddo to travel too far, because even us as adults, we don't like traveling that far because, transportation and commuting and all of that. But if they're up for it, they're in their senior year and they want to graduate and they don't want to change schools, then yes, we want to encourage that they stay in their school of origin, that the liaisons figure it out, and that the funding is there to get them to graduate. And sometimes when the districts are trying to figure that out, that's where the County Office of Ed can provide support between the figuring out component, that stopgap time, whether it's 2 weeks, whether it's a week, whether it is 3 weeks, to get them to go back and forth and share the cost. And we've had the pleasure of being able to be part of that sharing of costs so that it's split between 2 districts in the County Office of Ed, or 2 districts and 2 County Office of Eds, all with the intent of really just keeping that youth in mind and making sure they graduate, because we know how much that diploma is going to really be able to support them further beyond just the current situation that they're in right now. Gina, I know that, I don't know if you had anything else to add to this particular slide, because I wanted to mention There's a comment around my seating in the Council on Homelessness and advocating for youth and children, and just the education component that I try to bring to the overall conversation, as well as just, you know, that reminder to all of us around child welfare and what that means, their involvement around experiencing homelessness, and being very sensitive and supporting the family, especially when there's no neglect or abuse. So I wanted to call out and say, yes, lots of loves towards that. And
No, I don't have anything else.
I think the other ones are just, oh, there's one question. The liaison listed does not have Clinton Valley Charter
Oh.
School. We do have a charter list, forgive us. It is on our website, so give me a second. I will put that in the chat. And that is under our youth services. We do keep these lists up to date every year. We try to do it at least once a year. My admin reaches out to every single district as well as the charters and asks that they provide an updated contact person. And so on the youth services website, you'll see it under our Education for Homeless Children and Youth tab. And then you'll see the district liaison, and let me double check. I think, Gina, we're going to have to make sure. I'm not seeing it on the Education for Homeless Youth side. So if you go under the Foster Youth Services Coordinating. Oh, I stand corrected. I don't see our.
I know the
for-
website's in process. Jamie, we can send that to you, and if you could send that
Yes.
out with meeting materials, that'd be great.
But ultimately, they usually are there. We usually have the list for the district liaisons and then the charter list as well. So I do apologize for that. But every charter and every district is required to identify the person who will be providing that support.
Anything else?
That is all. Thank you, Gina.
All right. So getting back to unaccompanied youth, in most cases, the unaccompanied youth in the school district will agree on what's a student's best interest. And we didn't go too deep into that today. Alejandra did mention it earlier. But sometimes there are occasions when an agreement can't be reached. And in these circumstances, the McKinney-Vento Act provides for the settling of disputes through the dispute resolution process. And when that happens between a school district and an unaccompanied youth, the McKinney-Vento Act requires that the school district, of course, enrolls the student immediately at the school of their request. And in addition to that, districts must provide the youth with a written explanation of the position. And districts are also required to inform the right of the appeal process and the decision, and then connecting the youth to the local liaison, making sure that the dispute resolution process is carried out as quickly as possible. The student that's enrolled at the requested school can continue at that school until the final resolution of the dispute and the appeals process has gone through. And under the Department of Ed and the guidance for them, they clarify that in addition to immediate enrollment in the requested school, the student must also receive all students or all services for which they're eligible for until the final outcome of the dispute resolution process, including the appeals process. So the dispute resolution process can get a little dicey. It does happen, not very frequently, but we do see cases that make its way up to the county level occasionally. Next slide, please. So we have given you lots and lots of information today. So when it comes to putting all these pieces together, we know there's a lot of moving parts, but we really just want everyone to take away from this of how to take in these educational needs. So what the student and family is experiencing, what they need in order to, most importantly, get behind a desk and get back in school, and then what resources can help the family in their overall situation. But we also want everyone here to be mindful and intentional about including the district liaison, connecting with them, establishing a relationship with them so that everyone's on the same page with the family and how to best support them. Next slide, please.
So review. When you're thinking about, whew, that was a lot of information, and what should I keep in mind is this is your best practice review sheet. Immediate enrollment, transportation assistance, tutoring, which kind of goes into like services and support, anything that will make the child be successful in staying in school. And with that, school supplies, hygienes, clothes as needed to attend and fully participate in school. So ultimately, let's get them in school and then stabilize via transportation and anything else that will make them successful. Next slide. So this is taken from a document that really speaks to the collaboration between CoCs and the education world, and being mindful of how can we continue to work together successfully. And of course, we've reviewed, we've already done most of what is listed here. So speaking the same language, understanding that your HUD definition of homelessness is different from education definition of homelessness, and how do we support each other's work, being mindful that some of these limitations are beyond our control and beyond the control of the provider or the education, and we all are doing our best. Sharing data as much as we can. I know this one continues to be a challenge for our community. I acknowledge that I am officially signing up to be part of the HMIS committee to hopefully dig deeper around how can I see those connections with the education world and the CoC world. And, you know, whether it is down the road, we enter into an MOU, or whether it's me convincing all of our districts to have HMIS data insert. I'm not 100% what the outcome will be, but I know we have to do better around how can we share data and be intentional, even for like the process of making sure kids are getting to school, right? Like if the provider knows the kid's not making it to school, but yet you see them leave every morning, right? Like that kind of stuff where the parents think they're leaving to school, but they're not actually making it in. So those kind of things that come up. Next slide. Of course, acknowledging that we all bring our own challenges, that it's not a perfect system. If not, we would be without jobs, all of us, right? But just being mindful of, like I said, we're doing the very best, and you're doing the very best, and we just want our families to be successful. Gina had mentioned it, and we'll keep saying it again. Call out to the liaisons, get them involved, go and introduce yourselves, especially if you're a provider who is close to a particular district, right? So if you're close to Antioch or Mount D or West Contra, reach out to them, introduce them to the program and the work that you're doing. It builds that relationship and that trust, and it allows for people to, you know, just pick up the call and say, hey, this is happening. How can we be of support? And then acknowledging the process and the protocols around case management and liaisons and how to evaluate a best interest. And do they stay in the school of origin? Do they, you know, is it a school of residency? And I know you heard all of this. And then tomorrow or in a couple of weeks when you have a case, you're going to go, okay, what am I supposed to do? Reach out to us, right? Or reach out to the liaison. We are happy to have those conversations and be a thought partner with you, because it's never black and white. You know, we're talking about people, and we're talking about a difficult situation they're going through. And so it's always good to just think out loud with someone and not feel like you have to do it alone. Next slide. And then in a perfect world down the road, we will have an MOU. MOUs allow us to really call out our responsibilities in a way that keeps us all up to date and revisiting. hopefully, wishful thinking that I'm putting out to the universe is that we do have a inter-agency, inter-MOU, whatever we call it, where we're coming together and acknowledging our ways to collaborate, our limitations, and then problem solving around how to better support children and youth experiencing homelessness. And then, of course, last but not least, the importance of identifying our McKinney-Vento students. If you don't encourage your families to identify as McKinney-Vento to the liaison, it's really hard to have them exercise their educational rights. And not waiting until there is a situation where they're getting kicked out of the district or they're questioning their residency to then disclose that they are experiencing homelessness, because it allows the liaison to be involved and to advocate and to put things in place rather than waiting until the very end and then reacting as opposed to doing some intervention. We like to acknowledge that sometimes the school sites don't often keep everything that we shared in the forefront because they have, you know, more than just McKinney-Vento students. So you are going to get a registrar or two who may not be up to date because there's turnover and so forth. So again, identification helps the liaison know, which helps advocate the school site level and make sure that they have all of their rights and put in place and so forth. In addition, when they're applying for college, there is certain rights around that. We didn't go into that this time. Maybe Jamie will invite us back, but this was a lot, so we didn't want to overwhelm you. But just around the eligibility for college financial aid. And then, of course, acknowledging that there's the differences in the HUD definition, but ultimately the more we identify, the more we collaborate and leverage and braid the funding sources to support children and youth. Hey, any questions, comments? This is an opportunity for us to open.
Alejandra and Gina, can you put your emails in the chat or whatever email you would want people to reach out to if they have questions?
Absolutely.
And don't leave yet, folks, because we have one more quick thing to add at the end, but I'm going to leave some time for questions.
Thank you, everyone. We hope you found this helpful. And please do not hesitate to reach out to Alejandra or myself if you have questions, if you come across a situation that you want to powwow with us, we're here to help.
Definitely. So I'm just a quick reminder. So I'm going to email everybody probably later today with the slide deck, a recording, but also some links that you all had around like the posters and the liaisons. But I also wanted to flag for people, if you have worked with any young people that are between the ages of 17 and 24, that have a lived experience of homelessness, we are seeking, and until Thursday is the deadline, we are seeking a youth representative on the Council on Homelessness. And part of what they would be doing is bringing forward this perspective of the challenges and the need for resources, all of that to the Council on Homelessness, which Alejandra mentioned she's on. That's like the overarching body that helps really think about homelessness in the county, helps make decisions. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat here. But I'm just going to stop sharing for a minute because we also are I'm just going to drop in the chat a very quick survey about this training, and as part of that, things that you want to get more information about, other kinds of related trainings you want to hear, what worked for you, what might be better next year. We always are seeking to improve. It sounds like folks learned a lot of new things this year, which is great. So if there are ways that we can help continue that learning, that would be awesome. I'm also will put in the chat the information about the youth seat. But I'll stop talking and leave it open for any questions people have for Alejandra and Gina.
This is Joe. I just wanted to say this was awesome. I appreciate the PDF of the liaisons because I didn't even know that they existed. And to have that bridge, I think it's really important for the folks doing the work and having that relationship with departments and different districts. And also, as lived experience advisor on the council, I'm always pitching that perspective of the feels behind homelessness. And I just appreciate the way you guys are coming towards this with the kiddos and the feels behind it, and just I don't know, the humanitarian side of things. It's just it means a lot. So good job.
Thanks, Joe. We appreciate that.
I'm also going to drop in the chat a flyer to the youth seat that you can print and share out. Are there any other questions? Actually, I'll just wait. I'll send that out with the email. I don't have anything else. Do you all?
No, I
Okay.
figured that people would not be mad at having an extra little bit of time to get ready for their next meeting, I'm sure, or the
Yes.
next thing on their to-do.
Let's give them 20 minutes.
Go do something fun. You have an extra 20 minutes. Go read a book. Go get outside. Take a
Take a
lap.
walk.
Thank you, everyone. Happy Monday.
Thanks,
you,
everyone.
Bye-bye.
now.
Thank you. Have a great day.